This is the Neo Ergo, a tinted Alice keyboard. We finally come to the point in the hobby of having an affordable tinted Alice keyboard. Before now, all the other aluminum tinted Alice boards have come at a ridiculously premium price. And now we have the Neo Ergo that starts at $130 before shipping. Depending on what features you go for, you can expect to pay a little over $200 after shipping. I know $200 may seem like a lot to some people, but it's still better than previous iterations of this style of keyboard, like the Type K or the Angry Mao AFA. So having cheaper options is always a good thing. So why an Alice layout, and why tinted? The Alice layout originates from the Linworks EM7 keyboard, which was an attempt at an ergonomic layout. This keyboard inspired the TGR Alice, which is where the name of the layout comes from today. Of course, there are much older examples of similar ergonomic keyboards, but these two keyboards are the main influences of all the Alice boards we have in the custom scenes today. So, is an Alice layout actually ergonomic? By having your hands a bit farther apart and tilted more inwards, it prevents ulnar deviation, where your wrists are bent outwards. This can cause wrist problems like arthritis or carpal tunnel over time. Some people say it's not a true ergonomic keyboard or an ergonomic layout, but personally for me, it feels more comfortable to type on. Tenting is something that's been around for several decades and is meant to reduce muscle strain on your forearms. By tenting your keyboard, it helps reduce the risk of nerve or tendon injury in your wrist. There's a cool video by Digma Labs on YouTube where they talk about the history and research that's gone into just why tenting your keyboard is beneficial for you. So definitely check that out if the topic of ergonomics is interesting to you. But if you've seen people use split tinted keyboards, or if you've watched that video I just mentioned, the tenting angle is usually much higher, whereas the tenting angle on the Ergo is only 5 degrees. It's hard to say whether that 5 degrees makes a difference ergonomically. I think it feels slightly better personally, but the difference in going from an untented Alice to a tented Alice is relatively small compared to going from a regular layout like a 60% or TKL to an untented Alice layout. But of course, if you really care about your ergonomics when you sit at your computer, there's much more that goes into it, such as desk height, chair height, how your arms and legs rest in relation to those, and even how your monitor is positioned. An ergonomic keyboard, whether you consider that to be the Neo Ergo or a split tinted keyboard, is only one small part of an ergonomic solution. So, is it worth buying to try out? Let's say if you haven't tried an Alice keyboard before. If you want to try something new, I think a different layout can be relatively more interesting than trying a new switch, or going from one form factor to another like a 60% to a TKL. Some people just like the Alice layout right away, some people love it, some take a while to get used to it, and that's fine. The Neo Ergo definitely feels more like an Alice keyboard than a tinted keyboard, so if you already know you dislike Alice layouts, the Neo Ergo isn't a board I would recommend personally. But if you want to try something a little different, I think this board is pretty fun to type on honestly, and it's one I see myself keeping in my collection for a long time, even when I'm eventually done with this hobby. So now let's go over some of the basic features of this board. We have a typing angle of 8 degrees and a tenting angle of 5 degrees. The front height at the middle of the board is a tall 27 millimeters, and then it tapers down to a short 14 millimeters at the sides, which is surprisingly very short. They had to make the bottom piece very thin for that. Because of how tall it is, I do recommend spending the extra money to buy the wrist rest. Even if the front height tapers down, having my wrist bent upwards to be able to type on this makes me feel like I'm going to get carpal tunnel or arthritis in a week. I know it kind of sucks to have a wrist rest taking up extra space on your desk. At least that's how I viewed wrist rests before, but I personally think it's a must-have for this keyboard. Now with the acrylic wrist rest that I have, it can have a dusty feeling or texture to it when you first get it. I was able to rub a layer of some kind of coating off very easily, but after you rub it all over, you won't have that problem. Unless you have sweaty palms like me. That dusty feeling comes back when your sweat dries on the wrist rest. It's not super distracting, but I am kind of conscious of it every now and then, and I wipe it down once in a while. We have the ball catch latch here, which is now used in many keyboards nowadays for ease of disassembly, and we also have the magnetic connectors for the PCB to connect to the daughter board. I'm not gonna lie, when these magnetic connectors were first implemented into previous QK or Neo keyboards, I kinda thought it was a useless gimmick compared to a standard JST cable. But in combination with the ball catch latches, it's just so easy to take your PCB out, lay it on your desk, and then insert switches into the PCB. Because if you insert switches without taking out the PCB, you run the risk of popping out the hot swap socket. I always did it the unsafe way because I was too lazy to unscrew everything and fiddle with the JST cable, but the magnetic connectors with the ball catch latch makes that step so much faster, and I would probably disassemble the board to insert new switches way more often if I had a hot swap PCB for this. So I built my Neo Ergo soldered plateless because I'm cheap, and I wanted to save money on the PCB and not buy a plate. But plateless is fun because it has a surprising amount of bounce and flex to it. I didn't expect this much flex because the shorter length of the PCB would mean less flex compared to a regular PCB, but our hands aren't in the middle when we type on a regular PCB, which is why the bounce might feel comparable. But anyways, the gasket implementation makes this feel really nice to type on. It definitely feels like the board has a softer typing feel overall, though firmer on the center two columns, it doesn't necessarily feel too inconsistent with the rest of the board. There are these LED diffusers that are meant to fill the gaps where the layout kinda just folds, but they're meant to be mounted with the plate. Otherwise, on a plateless build like this, they're pretty loose and don't cover the LEDs when you look directly from above, though from a normal sitting position, they do prevent the LEDs from shining directly into your eyes, and honestly, they look better than nothing. With my plateless build, it is on the clacky side, as most plateless builds tend to sound. There is a tiny bit of resonance though. It's not really an issue, but I wanted to see if a force break mod can make a difference. There's barely any contact between the top and bottom of the case on the sides, but the top case rests on the kernel right here. So I figured reducing the contact here with tape and creating a force break, it would clean up that small amount of resonance that I hear. And it pretty much worked. I'll have a comparison in the sound tests. Anyway, thanks for watching, especially if you watched all the way through. Here are the sound tests.